It was a time when hearts beat louder than reason and dreams seemed boundless. A young, wealthy woman, bursting with ambition and sheltered by privilege, found herself captivated by the most unexpected of romances. He wasn't what her family envisioned. He was a humble, intelligent man, full of charm but with empty pockets. Their love blossomed in secret, hidden in stolen moments and quiet whispers, like a fragile flower thriving in the cracks of an unyielding wall. It wasn't supposed to happen, yet it did, and it was beautiful. Their connection was magnetic, undeniable, a collision of two souls yearning for a deeper truth. But reality has a way of reminding us who holds the reins, doesn't it? Her family, firm believers in societal norms and economic status, quickly intervened. They painted him as an unsuitable match, tearing down the love she held so dearly. Compassion had no place in their world of cold calculations. Still, they resisted, like young lovers often do, finding solace in the shadows. Each meeting felt like an act of rebellion, a fleeting moment where the world melted away. And with every glance, every touch, they defied the odds. But no rebellion can last forever, and theirs was no exception. When her family moved to a neighboring city, it was as if the door to her happiness slammed shut. Distance wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Letters grew fewer, calls were impossible, and eventually, the silence between them grew deafening. She tried to hold on, but life has a cruel way of pulling you forward, even when your heart is anchored to the past. For years, she buried the pain under layers of obligations, all the while keeping his memory alive like a secret flame in the coldest winter. The years were unkind to their love, but merciful to her ambitions. She married into wealth, as was expected, and built a life that sparkled on the surface but felt hollow underneath. Still, she couldn't forget. How could she? Some loves leave imprints so deep they become part of who you are. It wasn't just romance. It was empathy, the rare kind that makes you see the world differently. Even as she stood in gilded halls and wore the finest jewels, her mind wandered back to that simpler time, that simpler man. His laughter, his kindness, his compassion, it haunted her. In the privacy of her thoughts, she replayed those moments, not with regret but with longing. What if? What could have been? These questions became the backdrop of her life. And yet, life has a way of circling back, doesn't it? Just as she thought those memories were destined to remain buried, a twist of fate began to unfold. She couldn't have known it then, but the journey she thought had ended was only just beginning. Fate has a curious way of leading us back to where we started, doesn't it? Years had passed since her youthful romance, yet the memory of that love remained etched in her heart. One day, as she returned to the town that held the echoes of her past, she found herself walking the same streets that once witnessed their secret rendezvous. It felt bittersweet, familiar yet distant, like returning to a childhood home only to find it changed. Little did she know, a chance encounter would reignite emotions she thought had been buried forever. As she settled back into the rhythms of the old town, whispers of his name began to reach her ears. He was still there, living a modest life, though time had not been kind. Curiosity turned into longing, and longing into action. She sought him out, her heart pounding as though she were a young girl again. When they finally met, it was as if time stood still. But this was no fairy tale reunion. He was frail, his once bright eyes dimmed by illness, his compassion for others still unwavering. Their meeting was a collision of joy and heartbreak. He spoke of his struggles, his loneliness, and, most painfully, his young son who had lost his mother years ago. She listened with a heart full of empathy, knowing that her wealth could never undo his suffering, but perhaps could ease his burden. And then, he made a quiet confession. He didn't have much time left. Those words felt like daggers, each one slicing through her carefully constructed life. What could she do? She had lived a life of luxury, yet it felt meaningless compared to the pain in his voice. In that moment, a promise formed. A promise born not out of pity but out of love, both past and present. She vowed to protect his son, to give him the opportunities his father had been denied. It wasn't just a promise to him. It was a promise to herself, a chance to honor the love they once shared. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. She visited him often, bringing comfort in the form of small gestures, homemade meals, stories from their youth, moments of quiet laughter. He opened up about his life, and with every story, she saw not just the man he had become but the boy she once loved. It was a bond not easily described, a blend of nostalgia, respect, and deep compassion. When the inevitable came, it was as if the world had lost a little of its light. He passed away quietly, his hand in hers, leaving her with a mixture of grief and gratitude. Grief for the life cut short, gratitude for the chance to say goodbye. But as she stood by his graveside, her gaze turned to the boy who now clung to her hand. He was a part of her old love, a living reminder of the promises she had yet to fulfill. And so, her life took a new direction. What began as a return to her hometown had transformed into a mission of empathy and inspiration. She wasn't just grieving a lost love, she was nurturing a new one, rooted in responsibility and the kind of compassion that turns pain into purpose. But what did the future hold for her and the boy? Only time would tell. Some loves refuse to fade, no matter how many years or lifetimes pass. For her, the memories of that youthful romance remained vivid, like an old photograph kept in pristine condition. Even as she built a life filled with wealth and societal expectations, her thoughts often wandered back to him. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was a deep, aching connection that time couldn't erase. Every now and then, she would find herself lost in moments of quiet reflection, wondering how different life could have been. Her marriage had been one of convenience rather than passion. The man she married provided her with stability, prestige, and everything her family had hoped for, but never the kind of love she had once known. She attended galas, wore diamonds, and lived in grand estates, yet none of it filled the void left by his absence. Behind the grandeur of her lifestyle, there was an unspoken loneliness, a longing for a life that might have been simpler but infinitely more fulfilling. From afar, she kept track of him, using the resources her wealth afforded her to quietly follow his journey. She knew about his struggles, his joys, and, most heartbreakingly, his losses. It wasn't obsession, it was empathy, the kind that tied her fate to his in ways she couldn't explain. She told herself it was enough to know he was alive and making his way in the world. But deep down, she always hoped their paths would cross again. Even as years turned into decades, she carried his memory like a cherished secret. The laughter they had shared, the dreams they had once whispered to each other, all stayed with her. It was a kind of romance story she could never replicate, no matter how hard she tried. While others spoke of their first loves with passing fondness, hers felt eternal, as though it had become part of her very soul. When she returned to the town of her youth, it wasn't just about moving back. It was about coming home. The streets were different, the buildings modernized, but the air carried the same bittersweet familiarity. Every corner seemed to whisper his name. Every breeze seemed to echo their laughter. It was as if the town itself remembered, holding pieces of their story in its cobblestone paths and rustling leaves. Her reunion with him wasn't just a meeting. It was the rekindling of a story that had never truly ended. As she sat by his bedside, hearing the rasp in his voice, she saw not just the man weakened by time, but the boy who had once held her heart. The love they had shared was still there, quiet yet unwavering, a testament to the depth of their bond. And though he was gone too soon, their connection had left her with a purpose. His son, a living embodiment of everything she had once loved, became her new focus. It wasn't just about keeping a promise. It was about finding a way to honor the past while shaping the future. But how would she bridge the gap between what was and what could be? The answer was already beginning to unfold. Life has an uncanny way of intertwining the past and the present, doesn't it? For years, she had carried the memory of his son like a quiet promise, but when she finally met him, it was as if fate itself had intervened. He was now 21, a young man with the same compassionate eyes she had fallen for decades ago. Yet, he had no idea who she truly was or the bond she had shared with his father. To him, she was simply a wealthy, kind stranger who took an unusual interest in his life. Their first meeting was almost accidental. or so it seemed. She had visited the university where he was studying, her presence as striking as ever despite her age. He caught her attention not because of his resemblance to his father, though that was undeniable, but because of his determination. He was working tirelessly to make ends meet, juggling studies and part-time jobs, much like his father once had. It stirred something deep within her, a mix of empathy and inspiration she hadn't felt in years. As their paths crossed more frequently, she began to draw closer to him, not as a replacement for what she'd lost, but as a continuation of it. She admired his resilience, his optimism, his ability to find joy in the smallest things. Over coffee and casual conversations, she started to see pieces of his father in him. The way he laughed, the way he listened, the way he spoke of his dreams. It wasn't just a connection. It was as though her past and present were colliding in the most unexpected of ways. For him, she was a mystery. Her wealth, her wisdom, her genuine interest in his well-being. It all felt too good to be true. He questioned her motives, wondering why someone like her would take an interest in someone like him. But her warmth, her stories, and her unwavering support began to break down his walls. She wasn't just a wealthy woman. She was someone who saw him, truly saw him, in a way no one else had before. Their bond deepened with time, each interaction bringing them closer in ways neither of them could fully understand. To her, he represented a second chance, not at romance, but at fulfilling the promise she had made long ago. To him, she was a source of guidance, inspiration, and compassion in a world that often felt indifferent. Together, they built something rare, something that transcended age and circumstances. But as their relationship grew, so did the questions. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story, more to the way she looked at him with such profound empathy. And she, too, found herself torn between the joy of their bond and the burden of the secrets she carried. How could she tell him the truth without risking everything they had built? The weight of her past began to press down on her, urging her to act before it was too late. Unbeknownst to him, her intentions were already set. She wasn't just building a bond. She was preparing for the day when her time would run out, ensuring that he would have everything he needed to thrive. But how would he react if he learned the truth? That question loomed over her like a storm cloud, even as their days together grew brighter. Time has a way of softening the edges of life, but for her, it also served as a reminder that her own clock was running out. At 71, she found herself confronting the inevitable. Her health was declining, and each passing day carried more urgency. Yet, in her heart, there was a sense of peace. She had a purpose, a promise to fulfill. And that promise wasn't just about honoring the past. It was about shaping the future of someone who had become incredibly dear to her. Her decision to leave everything to him wasn't made lightly. She had no children, no heirs, no one else to pass her legacy to. But more importantly, she saw in him the potential to do what she and his father had never been able to achieve. With her wealth, he could rise above the hardships that had defined so much of his life. It wasn't just charity. It was her way of turning sorrow into inspiration, pain into compassion. There were those who questioned her motives, of course. Friends, acquaintances, even distant relatives wondered why she would leave her fortune to someone so young, so seemingly unconnected to her life. But she didn't care about their judgments. They hadn't lived her story, hadn't carried the weight of her regrets. To her, this wasn't about money. It was about redemption. It was about finding a way to give him the life his father had dreamed of, but never had the chance to provide. She began the process quietly, working with lawyers to ensure everything would be in place. She didn't want him to know, not yet. For now, she wanted their time together to remain untainted by the complexities of wealth and inheritance. Their bond was built on something far deeper, and she wasn't ready to risk altering that. Still, every moment spent with him felt like a step closer to the fulfillment of her promise. But the weight of her secret grew heavier with time. Each conversation, each shared laugh, was laced with the knowledge of what was to come. She wondered if he would understand, if he would see her actions as an act of love rather than obligation. More than anything, she hoped he would carry forward the values she and his father had held dear: empathy, kindness, and an unwavering belief in the power of dreams. As her health continued to decline, she began to prepare him in subtle ways. She encouraged his education, his ambitions, his dreams, always pushing him to think bigger, reach higher. She wanted him to know that he was capable of achieving greatness, not because of her wealth, but because of who he was. And as she watched him grow into the man she knew he could be, her heart swelled with both pride and sadness. The day she signed the final papers, ensuring her inheritance would go to him, felt like closing a chapter. But it wasn't the end. It was a beginning, both for him and for the legacy of the love she had shared with his father. Yet, even as she finalized her plans, one question lingered in her mind. When he discovered the truth, would he see her actions as love or something else entirely? The truth has a way of surfacing, doesn't it? 7 days after the wedding, his world turned upside down. He had married her with gratitude in his heart and respect in his mind, but nothing had prepared him for what he was about to uncover. It started with a letter, tucked away in a drawer he had never noticed before. Written in her elegant, yet trembling hand, it revealed a story that felt almost too surreal to be true. As he read the words, his breath caught in his throat. She had loved his father, deeply, unconditionally, in a way that transcended time and circumstance. The wealth she now possessed had once been a barrier to their happiness, but now it had become a bridge to his future. The letter was a confession, a timeline of their shared past, and an explanation of why she had chosen him, not out of pity, but out of love for both him and the man who had shaped his life. His mind raced with questions. How had he not seen it? The way she looked at him, the stories she told, the quiet moments when her voice would falter. Everything suddenly made sense. Compassion flooded his heart, but so did confusion. He struggled to reconcile the woman he had come to love with the secrets she had carried. Had their bond been real, or was it just a shadow of the love she had lost? But as the shock settled, a different kind of understanding began to emerge. She hadn't just given him her fortune. She had given him a piece of herself, a connection to a past he hadn't even known existed. The weight of her decisions, the sacrifices she had made, all pointed to one undeniable truth. She had seen in him the continuation of the dreams she and his father had once shared. It wasn't about replacement. It was about legacy. In the days that followed, he found himself drawn back to her final words. "You are my second chance, my greatest hope." They weren't just words. They were a call to action, a reminder that the love she had carried wasn't meant to end with her. It was a love meant to inspire, to build, to create a future that honored the past without being shackled by it. Still, the questions lingered. Could he ever truly step out of the shadow of his father's memory? Would his actions be his own, or merely an extension of the promises she had made decades ago? These thoughts haunted him, but they also pushed him forward. He realized that her gift wasn't just material. It was the gift of choice, the freedom to define his own path. And so, as he stood on the precipice of a new life, he carried with him a profound sense of gratitude and responsibility. Her shocking revelation had changed everything, but it had also given him the clarity to see what mattered most. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He wasn't walking it alone. Her legacy, her love, and her unwavering compassion would be with him every step of the way. So, what's your take on this incredible journey? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss another heartwarming, thought-provoking romance story like this one. Your support means the world to us.